Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Miles Out right here. I've got something really exciting planned for you guys today. I've got a 15-pound brisket that I picked up at a local grocery store for $2 a pound. Thought it was a pretty good deal. So I just took it out of the freezer and I just got it thawed. So I'm ready to trim it. Before I do that, I need to make sure that I have enough seasoning. So I got an all-purpose rub that I use for my briskets, and it goes on literally everything that I cook. I've worked pretty hard to make sure I get the ratio down. So I've got one part of salt split up into half, so a half a part of that is Diamond Crystal Kosher salt. The other half of that is Himalayan sea salt, which equals up to be one part. The other part is Tallow cherry peppercorn. I've got these whole grains right here, so I'm gonna grind them up in my spice grinder so we can capture the most flavor that we can. Then I've got a half a part of garlic and a half a part of onion powder. And then I've got 1/8 part chipotle powder and 1/8 part cayenne pepper. I put all those things together, that's what we get. So we use these in cups. So I've got 1 cup of salt, 1 cup of pepper, a half cup of garlic, a half cup of onion powder, 1/8 cup of chipotle pepper, and 1/8 cup of cayenne pepper. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna grind up our peppercorn. If you go to your local thrift store, these $30, $40 grinders you can usually find for about $5, and it works great for grinding up spices. As you can see, I like this pepper to be moderately coarse, but the great thing about this grinder is it's inconsistent. I hate that with coffee, but with this peppercorn you get some powder, you get some larger chunks, and that really helps out with the texture and the flavors. Now we add our salt, and we're going to add garlic powder and onion powder and cayenne and chipotle. Isn't that a beautiful mix? Let's go ahead and mix it up. So now that we've got our beautiful rub set up, let's go ahead and clean this up. Let's get our brisket and let's trim it. That was pretty cool. When I was thawing it out in the water, it was floating, so that tells me there's enough fat in here to really give it some flavor. But I want to pack in a whole lot more flavor than just that. I wanted to share with you guys something that's really, really exciting. This quart jar right here contains bear tallow rendered from a friend of mine up in the Upper Peninsula, humanely harvested and rendered, and I was gifted this. Thank you, Mark and Lisa. This is a great gift. It's an honor to receive something like this. So I have some melted in here. I'm going to use this as a binder for my brisket, and then after I smoke it, when I get to wrap it, I'm going to coat it again for a second time in more bear tallow. First thing we're going to do is we're going to get our knife sharpened. So there are a few different ways you can sharpen a knife. Some people prefer the knife out method. I've got the shelf here. I have more control this way. And the third way, you can up and down and then up and down. That way you can look at it. You can accurately gauge which angle you want to hone your knife at. And this really isn't sharpening. This is just straightening out the edge. Sometimes if you cut it on a hard surface, the very tip will curl over. This will straighten that out and remove any burrs that you've got. It's going to make it really, really sharp. And using a bony knife like this is semi-flexible, and it's really imperative to having a lot of dexterity while you're trying to trim your brisket. So let's get started. There's a lot of fat, but it looks like it's decently trimmed. I've got a big chunk of fat right here that I want to kind of remove. If you remove any kind of meat, that's perfectly fine. If you got your silver skin, I kind of like to lift it up a little bit, get my knife under it, and just kind of work it up. Again, it's okay if you remove a little bit of meat. The less you remove, the better, but still. The seasoning won't really penetrate that well into the silver skin. I'm going to flip it around this way. Get it right here. Look at that. I'm going to bring the camera in so you can get a little bit better angle. Make sure you take your time with it. Now this thing we're going to do, I'm going to turn around here so you can see it. There's a lot of extra fluff around here. It's kind of ugly. And we're not worried about throwing away a little bit of meat because we're not going to throw this away. We can actually render this down, and we can throw this into stews and cook it differently. So let's cut a little bit more of this off, try to see if we can make it a little more aerodynamic. We can cut more of that off when we flip it over. It looks pretty good right there. Don't want to cut too much of this off right here. All this will render down. Kind of my rule of thumb is if I can press into it and it feels like the really good fat on a ribeye steak, that means it's going to render down into liquid fat. If it's really, really hard, then it's not going to. So they say you want about a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch of fat. A lot of this stuff is real thick. Okay, I went a little thin there, but that's all right. Now, we're not doing a competition here, so we're just kind of trimming it up. It seems like a pretty thick piece right here, so I'm gonna cut a section of it off. If you're having a hard time gripping the fat, you can always grab a piece of paper towel and it won't slip on you. There you go. That looks pretty good. I think I'm going to let that roll. I go ahead, now that I've been touching everything, I'm going to keep one hand clean. And I'm going to use this as a binder. This is my seasoning. Yes, I do actually season the underside. Some people don't. You go ahead and coat everything, rub it in really well, lather it up. Make sure you get a nice, good, thick layer. Don't be shy in your seasonings. I like a good peppery brisket. Let's get this bear tallow all over here. Look at that. Rub it in, massage it in, whatever you need to do. Isn't that beautiful? You know, I mean, you gotta love the ingredients. You gotta respect the ingredients. You know, this is a bear that lived its best life, and now it's feeding a couple households. And every single part of the bear was actually used, which is the proper way to hunt. So now we got that in there. Let's go ahead and get the sides first. I don't want an inch unseasoned on this brisket. Even if it's fat, I'll still season the fat. Missed a spot. There we go. That's going to be an amazing tasting brisket, I can guarantee that. Now that we're done seasoning this beautiful brisket with the bear tallow and the homemade seasonings, there's no way that this thing is going to lack a lot of flavor. Next thing I'm going to do is use the techniques that I've learned over the past few years to perfect this brisket. Make sure it's rendered down, make sure it gets a perfect bark on it, wrap it in the butcher paper. We're going to smoke it at 235 degrees until we get that perfect bark on it. Then we're going to cover it in the bear tallow again, wrap it up in butcher paper, put it back on the smoker, and bring her back up through the stall until she hits about 200. And then we're going to probe her for tenderness, and we're going to let her ride until I can poke her right through it, just like you're poking through hot butter. I can't wait to get this thing started, but it's not even noon, and we're going to put it on about 10 o'clock tonight. I'm going to cover it up and let it sit all day long and let all these salts absorb into this meat, so we get a very, very well-defined, flavorful meat that's going to come out perfect. Ooh. Here we are. Look at this. It's beautiful. All 15 pounds. We are ready to put this on. It's been sitting here, absorbing all this salt and this flavor, all the seasonings that went into there, pulling that in. We're ready to put this on the smoker. I've got my Rectech 700 smoker heating up right now. This rack is so nice. Look at that. Does your smoker have a dome light? Right. It's gonna be beautiful. I like to squish it up and get this flat portion as thick as possible. Put a little extra on here for good measure. Now we're going to let her go. This is definitely not necessary at this point in the game. Point and get it anyway. So I like to know what's going on and at what time. So I'm going to go ahead and probe the point and the flat. Oh! After about 8 or 9 hours, I'm going to open it up, check for bark, and then after that, we'll go from there. I'll add an hour or two, or I'll wrap it as is, and I'll bring you back in when that happens. Here we are in the middle of the night. It's about 4 a.m. I'm really sleepy, but I got to do this. I've got my bear tallow. I've got my butcher paper laid out. What I'm going to do first is go get some of this. I'm going to put this beautiful stuff all over, so that way we know we're going to get a good coating. Beautiful. Look at that. Beautiful brisket. It's not done yet. It's still got, it doesn't have a lot of flex to it. Got a little bit. The bark is really good. It's not coming off. It's not peeling off. So what I want to do, I'm going to get this somewhat liquefied bear tallow, smear it all over. We're just gonna nicely coat it all. Alright, so I went and grabbed a little bit more. I want to make sure that I have enough. Let's cover this whole thing in bear tallow. Beautiful. Alright, go ahead and wrap it up. Make sure it's as tight as a Christmas package. Alright, let's put her back in the smoker. Put her in. We'll go ahead and insert a probe into the flat. Then I'm going to get a probe into the center meat of the point. I think we're ready to close the lid. Let's let it ride out. I'm going to go back to bed. This thing's going to lure me when it hits 200. So now it's the next morning. I'm up, I'm making my coffee, I'm checking on my brisket. That's the first thing I'm going to do. I've got my little meat probe, so I'm going to go ahead and check that. I've got my meat thermometers in there, but you don't always know exactly if you're dead center on that meat. So I'm going to go ahead and probe it with this. Let's go check it out. So here we go. I got my brisket right here. I'm going to go ahead and use this hole right here. It's pretty soft. Goes in pretty good. It says it's about 203 degrees in the flat, so it looks like that's about done. I got a little bit of resistance right here. So we got 197 right here, 198, 196. So there's a little bit of resistance. I can still push on it. What we want is like this. We want it to just no resistance at all. So we probed it on that flat. It's done, but we can't pull it off until everything else is done as well. So that's the nature of the beast. Sometimes your flat's done a little bit beforehand. Shouldn't mess anything up. As long as we give it a good rest, that temperature will come down evenly. When I let it rest, I try to let it get down to about 165 internal or a little bit less. I think it's done. Let's look at that. Probe it. Man, look at that. It goes straight in there. Doesn't even slow down. Yeah, it's beautiful. What's our temp? 205. It's perfect. All right. Let's go ahead. Take her out. Oh, she's so floppy and flexible. That's so good. Now this is where the magic happens, right here. Goes in a brisket, comes out a brisket. That really doesn't sound like a whole lot of magic, but let me tell you what. If you cut open it right now, it's going to be really kind of dry and just fall apart. You let it cool off some. It'll tighten up a little bit. It'll retain a lot of those juices instead of cutting it out right now. This is exactly what we need. We're going to set the timer for about 2 hours, and we're going to probe it and see where we come from there. All right, so here it is, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It's been sitting for about 3 hours. Took about that long to get from 200 degrees to an internal temperature of 165. I'm ready to roll. It is bright out here, but it's a beautiful day. It's right around 50 degrees. It's perfect for me. I love the cool weather. So the first thing I always do is I get my workstation set up. So I do a double sheet pan. I got a large cutting board. I put that in the pan so all the juices will run out and we'll be able to keep them in here, right? Let's go ahead and get started. I have paper towels. I have a trash can. I put that right next to here, so that way when I unwrap it, I've got somewhere to put all my dunnage. Then I've got this extra, so as I'm slicing it and making a mess, I can put everything over here, right? I'm gonna go ahead. I sharpen my knife, make sure it's nice and sharp. See if it's sharp. Good enough for me. So let's start by getting this bad boy out. I'm gonna set it down because I'm short. All right. I'm gonna bring you in closer so we can unwrap it together. Man, some of this bark is a little hard. It's still gonna eat just like the rest of it. Let's take a look at this. See if this is tender enough. Got this gelatinous fat. It's beautiful. It just falls right apart. It looks dry. Let's see if it is dry. Oh, that's really good. Let's go ahead and clear this off the board. So what I typically like to do is in between the flat and the point, typically like to separate it. So then you've got this beautiful flat right here, where the flat runs this way, the point runs this way. So we're actually gonna slice this a little bit differently. This is the money machine right here. I absolutely love the point. Man, look at this. Let me cut one more piece. Let's take a look at this. You can see that. Just falls right apart. This is a great brisket right there. Look how thick it is. Still just folds right over your finger. It's completely floppy. It's full of tender juices. Man, and even got a nice good bark on the outside. It's chewy. Goes to a very tender, fatty, gelatinous fat. Let's finish cutting this up, huh? A lot of fat on this corner, but I chose not to cut that off. Man, look at that glistening, beautiful fat. Oh man. You can't get better than that. Still got a little bit of that smoke ring. It's got all that flavor from it. Oh man. You know, I've had people ask me, why are you cooking so much food? I mean, 15 pounds, you know, it'll probably end up about 8 to 12 pounds when it's done. What I like to do, I also separate in these into 1 pound bags, and that's easily 4 meals right there. You know, you give each person a 1/4 pound, serve some vegetables and some sides with that. You can put it on a sandwich. You can make brisket tacos. My favorite is brisket grits with a nice rustic grits. Let me try this. That's so good. It's tender, it's juicy. It's salty, but not too salty. It's got tons of flavor. You guys, this is wonderful. This got a little hotter. It's a little hard on the outside, but that's the bark. And we love the nice, crispy, kind of crunchy bark on the outside. That's exactly what this is. I'll bring you in for a close-up. If it's not super tender, juicy in the flat, that's fine. There's very little fat on that, so it dries out a lot quicker. This by far is not dry, but it's not my perfect brisket. So what I'll do is I'll chop this up and I'll make some brisket chili, and that makes a fantastic chili. You let it sit in that stew and the whole thing soaks up all that flavor, all that brisket seasoning, and it just gets nice and smoky. It's just a nice smoky bowl of chili. It's just delicious. You guys, thank you so much for making it to the end of the video with me. I talked a lot, I did a lot of things, I explained a lot of things. Now, take everything that I say with a grain of salt, because you may have been taught something completely different. There's 100 good ways to make a brisket. This is a technique that I found that tends to be the most fail-safe. It works with a schedule. You start it off at 10 o'clock at night. About 4 or 5 in the morning, it's ready to wrap. Around 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, it's ready to pull off. Let it rest for a few hours. By noon, you're pretty much ready to go. Now, that's with like a 15-pound brisket. If you do a 20-pound brisket, might as well start it at 10 o'clock. It's ready for dinner. I was terrified of brisket for the first few years while I was trying to learn how to do smoking. I took the easy route and stuck with pork shoulder because I always thought that brisket was really hard, until I started researching on how brisket really is simple. You just got to follow a few rules. I let it season for a minimum of an hour, up to 10 or 12 hours if I can, and I let it get down to room temperature. The second rule is I don't smoke it at 300. I smoke it at 225 to 235. The third rule is I pull it off and wrap it up when it gets around 165 to 170, so we can go ahead and push it past that stall. Now, there are other methods which I completely approve. Once you wrap it up, you're no longer getting a lot of smoke to it. It's already absorbed as much smoke as it can. The pores are starting to close up, so you can actually put it into your oven and finish it off that way. And that way you're saving your pellets, or you're saving your wood, or what have you. You know, it could be cost, or it could be managing the fire. Maybe you ran out of time. There's a lot of benefits for sticking that second part into the oven. The fourth rule is I start by temperature at 200 degrees, but I don't pull it off on temperature. And that's the biggest mistake that I made in the first couple of briskets, is a 201, 202. I've had a few briskets that weren't really done until it was 210. Every brisket is completely different. So if anything you take away, the last two rules are the most critical, is you probe for tenderness. If you put that meat thermometer or that skewer in that meat and it doesn't go in and out like you're sticking a hot knife through butter, it's not done. You got to let all that fat render, all that connective tissue break down, and as soon as you pull it off, you put it into a cooler and you let it sit for a minimum of 2 hours. All those juices that have gone to the very center of the meat are going to start redistributing to the outer parts of the meat, and it's going to tenderize it. It's going to make it juicy. It's going to make it super flavorful. It's going to be a really awesome brisket. If you slice into it right away, you see all those videos where people are squishing on it and the juices are just oozing out. A lot of times they didn't rest it long enough. So that's the two critical points that I have. You've got to let it rest, and you got to pull it when it's probe tender, not at a temperature. Temperature does not matter because every brisket's different. I love teaching what I know. I know that next time I try to make a brisket video, I've already learned a few more things, and my brisket's going to be better. It's a learning process. Every single time you smoke something, you cook something, it's a learning process, and that's where I'm at. I'm going to let you guys go on to the next video. Hopefully you learned something. If I did something that grates your nerves or something that you didn't really agree with, definitely let me know. I'm an open book, and I also accept critical feedback because I can't grow, I can't learn unless somebody tells me, hey, you're doing it wrong, try it this way, or try it that way. I'm going to try it that way. If you want me to do a brisket a certain way and a certain style that you swear by, let me know and I will make a video for you, and I'll call you out on that, and I'll let you know how good it is. Hopefully it's not bad, because I'm sure you won't steer me in the wrong direction. But definitely like this video if you enjoyed it. If you learned something, subscribe to my channel. We're going out west to the Balloon Fest in October, and there's also an annular eclipse. And me being into some wildlife photography, I've got a zoom lens, I bought a filter, and that's going to be super awesome. I'm sure there's lots of wildlife out there that I haven't seen before. So come on that adventure with me. You've got a few months to subscribe, but don't wait, because you're going to forget about me. I'm going to go ahead and close this video, so thank you guys so much for watching this video and making it to the end with me. Again, this is Miles Out, right here.